Welcome, everybody. This is episode number 51 of Tuesday Morning Grind. Today we have with us John Bordwine. John is someone I've had the pleasure to work with over the last few years, has a ton of experience building out risk management programs, building out security programs, navigating compliance. Currently the AVP of Product and Cloud Compliance at Hyland, prior leadership experience at companies like Citrix and Symantec and others. John, thanks so much for being here.
I appreciate your time, Christian. Great to be here.
Awesome. So I'm going to set this up, and I want to get your opinion. So
Okay.
I read recently there was a study that said cybercrime is poised to be $10 trillion with a T around 2025, which is set to outpace the criminal drug trade. And then when you think about like the nature of attackers, advanced persistent threats, hacktivists, nation states, it really is kind of a crisis in terms of criminal activity and threats to private sector companies. And then you have this situation where there's security professionals, there's privacy professionals, there's compliance, there's GRC, there's risk management. Where does what folks like you and I do, the GRC space, the risk management space, compliance, where does that fit into this ecosystem? How do we help move the needle in terms of reducing true risk?
It's a great question. And I think if I had the perfect answer, I would be a wealthy man because everybody want to buy it, right? But basically, I see where there's common intersect points, right? And we still have to maintain these moving forward, even from a GRC perspective. Because if you think about it, the security controls, you started off discussing, right, the attack vectors that we're seeing today. The security controls that get put in place and the policies that align to those security controls are all great, but they also become compliance controls, right, within different frameworks. And then governing and understanding what the standards are underneath those policies that cross over from GRC, privacy, compliance, security with all those different elements. It really, really has to be lockstep these days because there's no single remediation effort, right? It's an ongoing process where I hate the term continuous monitoring because it seems so passive to me, but where we can do it running through continuous validation and continuously assessing the risk to the organization across multiple business units, all across all business units, correct? If you want to be correct about that. But it's just like across all of those key stakeholders, we have to go through this continuous risk analysis and assessment and determining when we go from the next steps. That's really, I mean, you brought it up, and it's even things like ransomware, right? I see companies today, they're defining what is their plan around ransomware. And it's not just because okay, somebody's been hit and they've got a hefty penalty to pay for it, whether it's to the attackers or if it's just reputational damage. There's a lot of aspects there. So even cybersecurity insurance policies are requiring, ransomware action plans today. So it crosses a lot of boundaries, quite honestly.
There's this phenomenon that I know we've dealt with together is you can look at a compliance program like I have to get SOC 2 or I have to get ISO certified. And there's various drivers behind that. Maybe it's to support the sales team or facilitate customer trust. Then you have another silo of professionals in the security that consider themselves true security, and they're doing vulnerability scans and incident response. And then you have the product team over here building a product, but they have to integrate security into that, or they should be, but no one's talking to each other. So you wind up with a compliance team that's doing check the box audits, product team who's trying to drive R&D, security team who's doing their thing. And I know you and I have talked many times about bringing all of those people to the table to build a risk management program. So one, why do you think these silos exist? And two, like what can we do to de-silo the organization and get everybody at the same table?
So if you think about it, I think there's two things, right? Let's go back, just as simple as the last 10 years, right? A lot more emphasis on security, a lot more emphasis on, going to the markets that you support in a cloud-based, SaaS offering. has changed the dynamics. And then looking at compliance as an entity, it's grown up in different parts of the organization in that 10-year period. So they've just naturally become siloed, unfortunately. Driving things forward, though, is you really need to look at, and I don't know, it's a term that a lot of people use, and it does make some level of sense, but left shifting in that process, right? Earlier in the design phase of new technologies or significant enhancements to technologies, we have to always start looking at how do we build security and compliance as a service and that foundational level to start driving that. That also means you're changing kind of the mindset of the R&D or the engineering organizations because they're seeing it as, here's just additional things that we do. Not, okay, we have to go get an audit, or no, we had too many vulnerabilities and, now we're being driven to go back and rework on, product to close out these vulnerabilities or these potential threat vectors. Instead of doing that, let's build it as a service. And then as we're building things like clouds, right, it's at the foundational level. And you build the components that all the services can take advantage of, utilize those items. And I think that's going to start driving it. So that's what I mean by the left shift, right?
Yep.
Build it in at the architectural concept phase and take it all the way through the full planning phase of any type of service or product that you're going to deliver to your customers. At the same time, you should be taking that same methodology internally to your IT systems, right? IT systems are not static. So as you're making significant changes within your organization, your day-to-day operations of the company, build that same kind of model by left shifting these activities and building it at a foundational level, right? As part of, always thought about, you have your servers and you have your operating systems and all the other pieces. Well, when you're building at, let's plan on the same things, right? That we would deliver to our customers internally. We don't want the internal attack vectors in place either, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think stopping that from happening? Because it makes total sense. You say, hey, look, all right, I'm building a product or I'm deploying an IT system. The right place to build in security is from the start. And then out of that should fall compliance activities because you built it from correctly from the beginning. But too often that doesn't happen. Why do you have a sense for why that's not a natural motion for organizations? And what have you seen work in terms of like building partnerships to get that to happen?
Yeah, the reason I think it has is the same things that you said, right? Okay, we have to go get a SOC 2 because we have financial customers, right, that are demanding it because it's a part of their regulatory compliance. Or we have customers that want to come in and do an audit against our cloud services, and they want to see all of our security criteria. So it was built out that way, right? It was kind of enforced that way. And moving it to this left shift really, I think is, very, very key and getting people to adopt that. But if you really think about it, if you put it in the right perspective, Christian, I think people will see it as, okay, I'm not going to come after you for, 15 different compliance frameworks. I'm not going to come after you on, GDPR in every state in United States and every country, that's attached to the EU that says we have privacy requirements, right? You're building all these things in as well as the security principles, the core security principles. You're building all that in. So what it actually does, it gives you back resources over a period of time instead of everything being just in time, right? I've used the phrase with many teams is we have to get past the just-in-time compliance or the just-in-time security, right?
Yep.
Those things are bolt-on and they're going to come back and they're going to get you again if you're not very, very, very diligent every day.
One of the things
My perspective.
100%. One of the things that I've noticed from the assessor perspective, I'm often coming in to do a security assessment, and this is specific to working with you in the past, is I'll often hear like other stakeholders like, yeah, I talked to John about that. So you've gotten ahead of the auditor. You've talked to them about it. You're sending the message to get it left. In the back of my head, I've always wondered about, like, as a leader, your methodology in terms of all the meetings before the meeting you must have. And you're new at Hyland right now. So what's your process as a leader to, like, get everybody engaged and on board and kind of ready to move security to the left? Do you have like a list of stakeholders you're going to interview? Is this natural? Is it just what you do? Is it formalized?
Yeah, it is. It is rather formalized. In the most recent move, right? It's like it was a meet and greet sessions, a whole lot of meet and greet sessions, right? From the key stakeholder, the executive leadership team, and the key stakeholders. And the biggest thing is, here's a vision. I'm going to create a vision on what I think we need to accomplish. It doesn't matter which company you're at. You can do this. Build that vision that says, here's what we really want to accomplish, and here's why we want to accomplish it. And then after you've gotten through and you've met with these people and you've shared this vision, then you start seeing people say, okay, that makes sense, and you involve them in the strategy to meet that vision and the objectives, right? At that level. Once people start getting involved and they're actually being, very much engaged in helping build that strategy, then it makes that go forward process, right? The actual execution a lot easier. Won't make it easy, of course, because we're humans. We get set in our ways at times, right? It's a fault of us being humans. But it does make it easier for people to understand the vision and get them to help you develop the strategy to get to those next levels, Christian. I found that to be very, very key, right? You can't go in and say, here's a strategy. Oh, by the way, here's a vision, here's a strategy, and I've already started the execution plans. Because then it's like, nah, that's not
Yeah.
going to work for us.
There's definitely some psychology there because no one's going to take ownership or accountability of someone else's vision. Like, you take ownership and accountability of your vision. So if you help them be part of that vision making process, naturally it's going to go over better. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. You get them to help you rewrite it, what makes sense, right? From a business, and you have to look at it from the business perspective. Unfortunately, you can't look at it from a departmental perspective at the division and strategy level, right? Because if you do, then you end up with, just reinforcing silos sometimes if you're
Yeah,
not careful.
that's a good point. I think one of the things security and compliance folks can fall in the trap of is being really good at security and compliance, but understanding almost nothing about the business that they serve or the business's objectives or how they get revenue, their marketplace positioning. But sometimes that context makes all the difference in how you want to structure the security program. Because, for example, at one organization, security may be driven by revenue. Like, you have to have security certifications to do business with a certain sector. Another organization might be a very obvious attack or be very vulnerable to nation states because of the nature of the type of data they have. But that's all in a larger business context. How much time do you spend, like, getting to know the business in terms of not just what they do from a compliance perspective or their org structure, but how they make money? How important do you think that is?
I think it's very, very important. One of the things that I've done in the past and will continue to do is you take the companies, the business's strategy on a page, right? And you start breaking that down and say, okay, these are the elements of security that we're going to do to help fulfill these high level objectives. Here's what we're going to do under compliance or the broader GRC umbrella to help support what's driving the business, right? So it could be, hey, we want to be all in on cloud, right? We want to deliver X number of services to these particular markets. So how do we do that? How do we support those initiatives? And I think people see it much better that way. If they understand, okay, what's the big picture at the end that we're trying to accomplish, and then what are the pieces that we're doing as an organization to support that and make it happen, right? Instead of just saying, okay, we're gonna build more cloud stuff, right? It's like, okay, we're going to work towards what? How does compliance do that? Well, if you have to break it down a little bit further, right? So I
Yep.
think what you actually really look at it then is a kind of a layered strategy on the page, big picture, and how that correlates to security and compliance and overall GRC for the company to help you reach those objectives that the company set forward.
Are those the kind of conversations that you're having at like the leadership level? Because most,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, there's two pieces. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Chris, but
please.
there's two pieces, right? So yes, at the leadership level, but even down to the individual contributor level, right? They really want to understand these things. They want to see, they want to understand. Even when you're going out and say we need to go after this new framework, take the time, walk them through the business case that was developed for this so that they can understand what they're contributing to when you're asking them to look at a new framework or to do research on a new framework or you're going to stand up a new compliance project, right? They love knowing what they're doing, what that's going to contribute to the business case that's been set forward that the company signed off on.
Yeah.
Uh,
Are those, so there's, I guess, two levels that I've seen you operate. One is with your team that's beneath you, and you're clearly communicating, as you mentioned, the business, like the why behind it. Here's all the stuff you're doing, but here's how that supports the business with alignment. The the layer that's maybe removed from most folks because there's just fewer leaders is like, what kind of questions from your experience is, say, the CEO asking or the board asking? Are they wondering about compliance frameworks? Are they just reading the headlines? Are they focused in on how security is supporting various business objectives? Like, how do you talk to that group of people?
that group of people, they are concerned. I mean, today's environment, they are very, very much concerned about these things, both from protecting the company and also from the requirements that the customers have or will have, right, over time. So they're very interested. So what you actually do is, again, you're tying it back into the core business value of the company, right? We want to be this or this or this in this particular marketplace. And here's what the risks are associated to that, and here's how we're going to go about mitigating those risks. They do understand risk principles, quite honestly, but it's a difference in talking business risk as you and I would talk about control risk
Right.
or those type of things, right? So you have to have it at that level where understanding that if we if we don't meet the objectives around security, if we can't fully attest to the security of not only our product set, but XYZ as a company and the way that we operate within a security principles, then your ratings aren't so high with that potential customer, right? But at the same time, they always want to see the SOC 2 reports, the ISO reports, right? That go along with this to say, not only are you doing it, you've shown that you're doing it over time. And at any point, we can ask to see the evidence that validates that. Because think about it, the compliance controls are very, very much tied to security processes, right? And procedures. Then it gives them a little bit more of that comfort level. It's the trust principle, right? We'll go back to the SOC 2 things, right? Or the SOC program as a whole on the trust principles. So it allows us to do that. And the executives do get that. They're not so concerned, the senior executives, right? They're not as concerned about the compliance framework or whether you're on the security side, are you going to be following CIS or, what's going to be your guidepost? What they really want to know is what's the outcome? What's the impact of this in a positive nature if we do it for the business? And then what are the risks if we don't?
Yep. As an executive, so a lot of our listeners, John, are we have two types of listeners. We have folks that are in the weeds doing controls testing every day, building out security programs, and then we have executives. So for those folks who are in the weeds every day, kind of have their sights set on future executive positions, one phenomena that I've witnessed is a lot of the skills to be a great security or compliance practitioner. For example, being technical, understanding the compliance framework, knowing how to work with an auditor, aren't the skills you need to be a good leader, which would be building teams, understanding business, effective communication. How I've seen some folks, including yourself, um, able to navigate those waters, go from technical expert into an executive position. How did you acquire those skills? What was your journey like to be able to do that?
A lot of bruises and scars to show for
The
it,
hard
just to be
way.
quite honest.
Yeah,
It is, right? I'll answer you in seriousness, but at the same time, it is a learning experience all the way through,
absolutely.
right? Um, so as you progress in your career, you say, okay, I want to go to the next level and move to the next level. You also have to look at my knowledge base is it gets a little rustier on the controls,
Yep.
right? As an assessor, I probably have enough that I could sit down and argue with you about a control intent enough, but I'm not going to be the person day to day that's working with you or anyone from your team, right? Um, but at the same time, you start taking that knowledge base and you do have to invest in yourself and you do have to invest in the time to understand the business principles associated to this, right? It gets more out of the weeds on the compliance frameworks or the security operations and understanding what the business value is to those things that you're trying to drive forward with. So it's kind of teaching yourself along the way, having mentors that will help you understand this and get to that point, and then just, realigning your mindset that you want to move to that next level and understanding, you know, it's great that you've gotten every control across 5 different frameworks embedded in your head, but that's not what executive leadership wants to hear, right? They want to hear about the risks, they want to hear about the potentials, they want to hear about accomplishments, right? Because you never don't want to give up the accomplishments. You still have to market things internally. But you have to think about that as a perspective. So, is there a magic plan? I didn't have a magic plan. When I started in this business, talking about cybersecurity, well, they didn't even call it cybersecurity. And the really compliance was minimal, regulatory compliance in certain market spaces. But now that's grown exponentially across many, many different frameworks and across many different markets, right? So you also have to learn how to adapt through that process. So I wish I could give you the magic answer,
Yeah.
but you have to invest in yourself, invest in your knowledge, and take some chances, right? That's what I was talking about by the bruises and the scars. Sometimes you take chances and just go for it. Say, I think this is the best way forward. People will correct you or they'll accept you, right?
One of the things that like I feel like you've always been good at doing is giving your team at bats to take risks. Often in a pretty safe environment, but sometimes you throw them in the deep, or maybe you didn't throw them in the deep end, but it is the deep end, and they get a chance to take a shot. So if you're thinking about people development, like kind of what's your approach to giving your team the opportunities to acquire those skills?
The thing is to be a mentor, number one. If people want to go that path, I'm more than happy to mentor them and talk to them about what my lessons learned have been, right? Trying to keep them from making the same mistakes that John made over the years. But the second thing is, yeah, it's been very simple, is even down to the people on my teams that have owned specific programs. I don't address it as you own a program. I said, that's your piece of the business. Own it, right? And if you need help, let people know. But move forward, put the plan together, and then let's talk about it. Make sure that we're not seeing any chasms that we're going to have to jump across, right? But at the end of the day, you own that piece of the business. Show me what you can do. And it seems to have paid off fairly well, right? It's not throwing anybody in the deep end. There's always a safety net, but it gives people the chance to I guess we'll use the old spread your wings type of analogy here, right? Spread your wings and go for it. You own the business. You own that piece of the business. There's multiple pieces to the business. It's not all just the what everybody thinks. Oh, the business is the company. It's like no, no. You own a piece of the business. You have your own little piece of the business here. Go see what you can do. Let's see how it works.
Yeah, I've found kind of as we've tried to develop folks here, like early on in my career, especially when I started Risk 360, I felt like a desire to do everything myself because I felt like it needed to be done to a certain quality, and I wasn't willing to like take the risk on a botched executive meeting or anything. But over
Yeah.
time, giving people at first safe opportunities to fail, but nonetheless opportunities to fail, and because you learn a lot from those high risk situations. And you mentioned this earlier, like the accountability, like people have to feel accountable to that to deliver a great presentation. And you, from my experience, at least, people don't let you down. Like they rise to the occasion, give a good presentation, maybe have opportunities to give them some critique on the back end. But once you do it a couple times, now you don't have to mentor them anymore. Like they can go do it and they can truly take it off your plate, which is really nice.
Right. That's the biggest thing. I mean, let them go. Let them see what they can do. Right. Like you said, you can critique them a little bit. You can, okay, I would have handled it a little bit differently. Or let's go through the questions you had on your presentation, right? Because there's meaning to questions, right? Not just answers to questions, but there's meaning to question, right?
Yep.
Sometimes, right? Maybe you weren't clear enough. Maybe next time you should use a graphic instead of a chart, whatever it is, right? Just different things that help people along the way. They had
Yep.
the right information. Maybe it wasn't presented the right way. But oftentimes you'll find they get through 90% of their presentation and it's like, wow, you're proud of them, right? And it's like, that's great.
Yeah.
You're moving forward.
Help them anticipate a few questions like, hey, I know the chief legal officer is going to be in here. I know that this person's going to be in here. These are the types of questions to prep for. Sometimes that's the hardest part, is just trying to like know the audience, anticipating questions. And if you can kind of gain that skill, you're good to go.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it's the thing is sometimes I'm one and people that have worked with me within my organization, they catch me sometimes. I'll ask very specific open-ended questions. Because there's an intent behind it. I'm not going to tell you. What I'm asking you is I'm going to ask you a very open-ended question, and you're probably going to walk away and say, "So why in the heck was he asking me that?" And then somewhere it's going to dawn on you. It's like, because you're not going to learn if I just give you the answer, right? I want to give you the thing
That's
that's going
that.
to make
That's
your brain click a little
that's
bit
that
more.
leadership patience. Like that's that unique patience that good leaders have. Like it's faster for me to just tell you and you go do it, but it's way more effective if I ask you and let you figure it out a day from now, as you're
Yeah,
trying to go to bed.
it's funny because sometimes it's like 9, 10 o'clock at night. I get a text and it's like, I get it. And it's like, okay, good.
Yeah, put that feather in your hat, feeling good. Um, when you think about kind of the marketplace in general, from a regulatory and compliance space, what are you seeing most folks ask about? Because there's a lot of stuff. There's ISO, there's SOC 2, there's FedRAMP, and some of it's market dependent. But are there any kind of trends that you're seeing as far as like what the hot topics are right now?
There are, and one of them really doesn't have a lot to do with the compliance frameworks. You're seeing more and more requests from customers to be able to have an audit clause within a contract. Right? They want to be able to have time to come in and go through kind of your all the information, right, that you would put together from these multiple frameworks, as well as, to talk to security people and to the compliance team and others and say, okay, let's do an audit against this. Because what's happening is we've all seen in different marketplaces, these things that pop up, right? People have lost information, they've had breaches, all these things. So the regulatory um, requirements have gotten more strict, and your customers are looking to kind of get to that zero risk, especially from their technology vendors, right? They're as close to that as they possibly can. So they'll take the information, if you fill out um, the SIG, right? The security information, right? Template. And then you also provide them with your ISO 27001 and your SOC 2 and your HIPAA and your PCI and all these other things, right? They still want to come in and take a good look at themselves. It's just I've seen more executive level risk managers over the past few years come into play as well. And they're generally the ones that will drive these types of initiatives. So when you talk about frameworks, I'm saying it's risk, right? They're looking to minimize as much risk as what their perspective is.
What do you think's driving that? Because theoretically, having an independent audit or certification is driven at reducing those kind of one-off questionnaires. But I'm kind of seeing that too, where companies still want to come in and have you fill out their questionnaire or do a light audit, blah, blah, blah. Do you think they just don't trust the certification, or is there some other driver?
I think it's really is they've looked at it and said it comes back to them as a customer saying we're going to minimize the risk as much as possible. So we'll take all the information that you provided to us. We're going to ingest that. Some of that will complete what we need to do within our risk review. And then there's going to be other areas we just want to dig in deeper. There's going to be, if you would go back through the security questionnaires that come in from customers that I've seen in the past and looked at these things and a bit of, you know, looking at trying to figure out what they're trying to accomplish. And it really just comes back to these must be areas within what they've defined as key risk areas, right? And they want to just go even deeper in these areas. Was it something that happened from a regulatory compliance? Was it something that happened from, you know, another company within that same market, right? Where do they get this information from? But they always are looking at, that risk parameter of, just like if you think about it, every company, and even like with government agencies, they all have certain risk criteria that they'll weigh more heavily than others. And if we're not hitting those within one of these frameworks, they're going to pick it up, right?
Yep.
Excuse me. And even if we are picking up in the framework, they want to see it. They want to, touch it, kind of thing.
How are you guys doing with that kind of volume? Because like I don't have a client out there that isn't complaining about the volume of security questionnaires that they get during the sales cycle. I've seen some organizations spin up whole departments that are aimed at specifically customer assurance and filling out questionnaires and the story around the security program. But that's a huge burden on companies. It's like a hidden tax, like just filling security questionnaires and assurance. So have you seen anything effective to kind of reduce that burden, or do you just have to manage it?
Yeah. Right now you kind of have to manage it, right? I think there's two pieces to it. Is number one is let's start looking at some tool sets that give us this capability, right? Respond once and then we can use it many, many, many times, right? Within a tool set, not a spreadsheet, not within, a Confluence page or something to that
Mm,
degree, but an actual tool that will allow you to do these type of things. That also plugs into your GRC tool, right? Because that information is relevant to what you're doing when you say, okay, we want to go back and review our controls, right? Do we have the right controls in place? Are we doing the right things? That kind of information coming back in. So your question was, how do you manage it? Ideally, and some from some of the past, is build an organization if that's their responsibility. But it plugs into compliance, it plugs into security, because we're all seeing questions come back. And if we don't understand why they're asking the question, we can get clarification. But it also says, okay, this is what our customers are expecting to see. Are we meeting it within the compliance frameworks? Are we meeting it within the benchmarks that we've set for our own security organization? I look at it as valuable information coming back in to the company, Christian, to be quite honest. Over time, hopefully it gets filled out enough, but we all know, right? The threats will continue. They will expand. They'll get more complicated, more sophisticated, and customers are going to come back in other areas. But utilizing that information is, to me, very key internally as well.
yeah. I got to think there's going to be like the tools you mentioned, like we have Phalanx at Risk 360. We're trying to help solve the problem. There's other great tools out there that exist too. But I agree. There's got to be like some kind of automation that ties your risk management program into this questionnaire business. And then the other thing is half the time it feels like the folks asking the questions Either it's been outsourced to a whole different company or a whole different country, or the person asking the questions doesn't actually understand the business risk that you present. So they're operating off a poorly written playbook that creates frustration. But it's just such a weird ecosystem that exists in terms of like businesses trying their best to do business with each other, but kind of afraid to do business together. Such a weird phenomena.
I've seen that time and time again. Okay, we've outsourced our risk management. And they're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. What's the risk of
Great.
outsourcing risk management? Thinking about company, where to start. So, assuming you're not in a situation where this is, but we have a lot of clients that they're just trying to get started. They've built a great product. They have, they're starting to get these questionnaires. They want to build out a risk management program. Maybe they want to go after their first certification or two. What's your advice for companies that want to get started? Is there a place, like if you had to start from ground zero, that you would like maybe pursue a certain certification or begin the journey somewhere?
Yeah, and I would probably look at the NIST 853. No, I'm just kidding. That's because that's very, very extensive.
The
Would
450
it be
pages?
would it be great to start there? Yes, it would be because you're going to cover a lot of ground, but that's a lot of work to do, right? Especially for a startup. I would say you would want to do two things, and this is done. This is experience, from practical experience in the past. Is look at the SOC program, right? Determine what you need to do to SOC. Let's take it and say, okay, SOC 2. Let's build in the right controls, within build in the right principles that we can mature through that, because you should never have a compliance program that doesn't align to objectives under CMMI, right, for maturing your processes. So it says take the SOC 2. You run your type ones, right? How are we going to do? How are we going to fare? We can actually even do, an external report on that. We can keep it internal, whatever we need to do that's a finding, right? And then move into your type twos, and then start expanding your control base. And at a point in time where you say, okay, where it becomes less effort. I won't say they never will say no effort, but it comes less effort to pull all the evidence back, make sure all the different teams, the stakeholders are on board. They know how to walk through an audit process. Then let's start expanding this. Let's break it out and look at things like 27001, right? And now we're going to start capturing a risk register because it's required, right? Maybe an earlier company didn't have much as a risk register, or it was minimum, or it was something that was handled by the legal team, right? Nothing against that, but maybe it's the things, right? So now you start getting to a consolidated risk register. All of those things should be building, to the next levels. What you've defined is how do we get to level 3 within CMMI, right? Where things are good, right? They're not great. There's still a little bit of risk, but we know where we're at and we're comfortable here. Take your SOC 2 program and your ISO program and move them to that level. It also makes it easier to bring things like a PCI or a HIPAA or other components, other frameworks into that model, because quite honestly, if you're doing SOC 2 and ISO, you have about 80% of the work already done
Yep.
for the other items, right?
Yep. That's the
So
exact path that we've seen work as well. Kind of SOC 2 is most flexible, mature it into an ISO, mature the overall program. What about the hardest? Is there one that's like, you're like, man, that was a beast in terms of frameworks?
FedRAMP?
Yeah. That was leading the witness question.
Well, we talked about 853. You know what the underlying components are to FedRAMP, right? FedRAMP is a
Yeah.
tough one. Probably one of the hardest ones to come across, just because it is extremely restrictive, right? The other frameworks, they were built more of a commercial mindset, to be quite
Mm.
honest. And FedRAMP's built on a government mindset.
Yep.
There's nothing wrong with it, but there's, a lot that you have to do within FedRAMP. You don't just go out and say, okay, we're going to get, just this part of our cloud certified, and they'll do it, right? There's a
Yep.
lot to do there. And I've seen, companies go through that process and have to realign many, many times over because it's just very, very difficult. And it's a different culture too.
Absolutely. Yeah, we always start off with our clients, no matter the compliance framework, is we usually do like a business case, especially if it's new to them, they don't know if they should be doing it. With SOC 2 and ISO, there's almost always a really good business case. Like there's enough revenue generating activities, there's enough goodness on the risk management front to move forward with those costs. But for FedRAMP, I would say probably 8 or 9 out of 10, once you do the business case, you realize that there probably isn't a good business case to move forward with it unless there's like a really big federal contract on the other end of that. So it's like a pretty big back out decision. But you can still
Well,
align
you,
to
yeah,
NIST, but yeah.
yeah, you can do the NIST. You can align to NIST, and then that's fine, right? Take your technologies through the NIST framework, and move to that part. But like you said, you have to think about things like FedRAMP. That's the first year, year and a half, maybe even 2 years, depending on how much effort you have to go through. That's total investment,
Yep.
not just your internal resourcing, but the platform you're going to sit on and the special tooling, because you can't just take what you doing in the commercial world and move it into FedRAMP, right? You can go the other way easier, take the FedRAMP stuff you did and move it into commercial, but going from commercial to FedRAMP doesn't work. And you see that because that's the Azure model and the AWS Gov model were not, hey, let's just take the commercial stuff and move it in. They built platforms specifically for this. And that's
Absolutely.
what you have to do. So you have to consider that. Like, oh wow, we think we have, a large amount that we can sell into the federal US federal government or state and local, because the state and local buys off of that contract as well. Yeah, but just think about it. You're going to have millions of dollars of investment, right? There's no return until you have that ATO, right? That
Yep. Absolutely.
authorization to operate. There's no revenue stream there,
Yep.
and it's going to take some hefty building. Whereas, like you said, TOC 2 and ISO, you can build those slowly into your process, and it doesn't interrupt you. So some additional requirements that engineering will need to do. It's more on the compliance team, though, from that
Yep.
perspective. When it comes to FedRAMP, it's everyone. Everyone in the company has to be
Oh
engaged.
yeah. Things a beast. Thinking about the future. So things that concern us and things that excite us about the future. So, um, what are you worried about when you think about cybersecurity, GRC, risk management? What are your biggest concerns?
My biggest concerns still are that there are the silos, right? We haven't quite aligned everything to the business operation, right? It's still sitting as cybersecurity. We need to do these things. We have to firewalls this way. We have to these special tools in place. We need to handle vulnerability remediation. This is the timelines. So it's still thought of as not a cohesive unit in the way of how we handle privacy and cybersecurity and compliance, and how does this all correlate to GRC, and how are we managing all of this in the same risk register as we handle all the other business opportunity or risk, right, within a consolidated risk register, to kind of get a much better view of how the organization is sitting from a risk posture perspective, right? That worries me because that leaves gaps, Christian. And gaps, we know what happens in our business when you have gaps. It's like something's falling off here,
Yep.
right? And it leaves us open to one thing or another. So that's my biggest fear today is, trying to get your arms around how do you make it all work, right? It's one thing to have a vision and to say, okay, and people say, yeah, that makes sense. It's another thing to actually begin executing on that, right? From workflows to output for auditors, right? It should all be in one place, one process, everyone involved, everyone understanding what they do, how it correlates, and what the dependencies are.
Have you
And we're
seen
not there
anything?
yet.
Have you seen anything move it in the right direction? Like anything noteworthy that's making progress there?
I do keep an eye on kind of the industry stuff going on, and I'm like, okay, I think people are starting to, a lot of different people in the industry are looking at this, right? As you know, right, from our past discussions, I just want to get us into a continuous audit state, right? So at any point in time, I pull up one dashboard and I can see how we're doing for cybersecurity, privacy,
Yep.
compliance frameworks. That would be great. And getting us to that point to be able to just do that, and then everybody can drill down in their own areas because they're being held accountable. And sometimes accountability is tough to get too in these models, right? And a siloed environment. So it's mutual accountability, but there's also the responsibility. So I think moving in that direction is and it's starting to gain more and more momentum to get to that point, and having the right tool sets, but better than that, having the appropriate mindset and shifting the mindset to say this is really important to us because it only takes one incident that damages your reputation as a company, is it kind of blows everything else out of the way, right, for a while. And companies have to look at that. It's not just are we making the revenue streams? Are we meeting our objectives? Is there margin the right way? Um, because one instance of something saying, okay, this was bad, the other stuff stops mattering for a while. We have to stop thinking that way too. They all just should move forward at the same time. And we're starting to see that. I think we are.
Yeah.
Does that
When I
make any
pitch,
sense? I hope.
oh yeah, it resonates big time because when I pitch cybersecurity or risk management to like brand new folks coming out of college, maybe wanting to start their career, one of the things that stand out to me is like just how much undiscovered or unarticulated principles there are in this space. Like, what does a security and risk management org structure look like? What are the standard communication protocols? What is the culture of an effective organization? What are the routine operating procedures that world-class organizations that manage risk should have? And that's largely unstandardized right now. Whereas maybe if you look at like the CFO role, that's more established because it's a little older, which means there's a huge opportunity for people starting in this career. This is a new structure that we're trying to optimize and figure out a vocabulary for. And that's exciting. That's a great place to start your career. And that usually wins people over on the fence. Like, yeah, it's a cool career to start. It's a big challenge, it's a
Yeah.
monumental challenge, but a lot of opportunity. Ending on a positive note. So we talked about what concerns you when it comes to risk management GRC. Like, what are you optimistic about? What are the things that excite you and that you see coming down the pipe when it comes to security, risk management, GRC?
I think one of the biggest things I think about this one is there is much better awareness at the C level within organizations. They are really seeing the value to, the cybersecurity and privacy and compliance, and they're getting the concepts of the GRC environments, and it's even getting into the board level, right? I've actually seen organizations that have taken board members and said, you're going to run our cybersecurity governance oversight, right? Or and generally they put privacy and compliance into that category. So starting to see that moving forward, right? Some companies have been there for a while, but I'm seeing a much better adoption of that across the board. And I think a lot of compliance people are probably saying, finally, right? Instead of and even cybersecurity and CISOs, right? I've learned a lot from CISOs over the years, and it is, well, why? Tell me again why we have to spend that money, right? And it's like, well, it's kind of like car insurance, right?
Yep. We're definitely getting to a better place where you don't have to start from like -5. We can at least start at 0 in terms of education.
Yeah,
Like there's a base set of knowledge and understanding that it seems like executives have, and that's a huge improvement.
that's a major improvement. To me, that's what excites me and say, okay, so now we can start driving some of these things. So folks like yourself and I have been trying to like get people to understand for years, right? We don't have to go, like you said, back and go, okay, let me start you off 10 years ago when all this stuff was fairly new and bring you up to speed, right? Not negating them, it just hasn't been their business principles. But now we can start moving some of these things forward. And I think it at a much faster pace, right? And people understanding that there's an investment that's necessary, but that's protecting the company. Is that kind of investment that we need to make.
Absolutely. Well, John, thanks so much, man. This has been an awesome conversation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with everybody. We appreciate having you here and everything you're doing for the companies you serve.
Well, Christian, I thank you for the time. And it was great catching up with you again. I felt like I was just catching up with you instead of sitting here creating a podcast. But it was great chatting with you as well. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And if you guys enjoyed watching this, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on any podcast app that you might listen to podcasts. You can also go to YouTube and you can search Risk 360. We have a playlist called Tuesday Morning Grind if you want to see our faces as we deliver these messages. And if you want to build, certify, have a program managed on your behalf, you can check out Risk 360. Those are the kinds of things that we do. A lot of the stuff me and John are talking about right now is exactly what Risk 360 does. You can check us out on risk360.com. Thanks again, John.